My family declared me dead and held a beautiful memorial service where they cried fake tears, posted touching tributes on social media, and then split my $75,000 inheritance among themselves. They even created a charity called the Daniel Reed Memorial Scholarship Fund and spent the next 18 months collecting tax-deductible donations while committing federal fraud in my dead son's name. The suffering wasn't just financial. They erased me completely. For a year and a half, I watched from the sidelines as my own parents and sister held memorial dinners, shared memories on Facebook, and played the grieving family while secretly celebrating that the family scapegoat was finally gone for good. They told everyone how tragic it was to lose their beloved son and brother, all while knowing exactly where I was and that I was very much alive. But here's what made my blood boil. They were enjoying every minute of it. My mother Lucy posted Instagram stories from expensive restaurants paid for with my inheritance money. My sister Evelyn bought a new car and posted photos with the caption, "Daniel would have wanted me to be happy." My father Raymond used my death certificate to claim Social Security benefits and bragged to his business partners about how smoothly the whole thing had gone. They thought they'd gotten away with the perfect crime. They thought the family disappointment had disappeared forever and taken all his inconvenient questions about their shady business dealings with him. They thought they could steal my money, fake my Seth, and live happily ever after on the profits. They had no idea I'd been documenting every single federal crime they'd committed in my name. Bank fraud, probate, fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, Social Security fraud. I had evidence of everything. And I had federal prosecutors who were very interested in meeting the family that thought death certificates were just another business tool. Tonight at their 4th of July family reunion, they're about to discover that dead men tell no tales, but living men with lawyers and criminal evidence tell very different stories. My mother dropped her wine glass when she saw me. To understand how my family could declare me dead without a second thought, you need to understand that I was always the expendable child in their perfect little dynasty. While my sister Evelyn got full funding for law school designer clothes and a trust fund for her future, I got lectures about personal responsibility and the importance of making my own way in the world. The difference in treatment wasn't subtle. Evelyn's college tuition paid in full, her law school expenses covered completely, her post-graduation apartment deposit and first year's rent, an investment in her future success. Meanwhile, when I asked for help with community college tuition, I was told that struggling would build character, and that handouts would make me weak. Family dinners were exercises in highlighting Evelyn's achievements, while treating my accomplishments like inconvenient interruptions. She'd talk about her legal internships and networking events, while I'd mention my job promotions or certification programs, only to have the conversation immediately shift back to her brilliant career trajectory. The message was crystal clear. Evelyn was the investment, and I was the expense they were trying to minimize. She was the child who would carry on the family legacy, while I was the disappointment who would hopefully figure out how to disappear gracefully from their social circles. I was the expendable child they'd always treated as disposable. After years of being treated like a financial burden and social embarrassment, I finally decided to give them exactly what they seemed to want: my complete absence from their lives. The final argument came during a family dinner where they criticized my life choices, my career path, my apartment, and my girlfriend, all while praising Evelyn's latest legal victory. I walked out that night and never came back. Changed my address without telling them. Got a new phone number, blocked them on social media, and created a life where their opinions and financial manipulations couldn't reach me. For the first time in my adult life, I made decisions without considering how they'd react or whether they'd approve. The peace was immediate and profound. No more guilt trips about family obligations. No more comparisons to my perfect sister. No more lectures about gratitude and responsibility from people who'd never treated me with basic respect. I disappeared so completely they thought I'd never find out. What I didn't realize at the time was how perfect my disappearance was for their financial plans. My parents, Raymond and Lucy, had built their wealth through a combination of legitimate business success and some very creative accounting practices. They owned multiple properties, had offshore accounts, and treated tax law like a guideline rather than a requirement. When my grandfather died and left each of his grandchildren $75,000, my parents saw an opportunity. With me completely out of the picture and no contact information, they could claim I was unreachable, file the right paperwork, and redirect my inheritance to more deserving family members. But why stop at just claiming I was missing when they could claim I was dead? A death certificate would close the inheritance case permanently, trigger life insurance payouts, and create opportunities for tax-deductible charitable donations through memorial funds. Money was the only language they spoke fluently. The discovery that I was officially dead came in the most mundane way possible, a form letter from the Social Security Administration. I was sitting in my apartment going through mail when I opened an envelope that politely informed me that my Social Security benefits had been terminated due to my death on March 15th of the previous year. My first thought was that this had to be some kind of administrative error. People don't just get declared dead by accident. There are procedures, paperwork, verification processes. Someone would have to file a death certificate, and that someone would have to provide proof that I'd actually died. But when I called the Social Security office to report the error, the representative was very clear about what was in their system. Daniel Marcus Reed, born on my birthday with my Social Security number, had been officially pronounced dead. The death certificate was signed by a licensed physician and notarized by Tom Hendricks, a name I recognized immediately as my father's longtime business partner. The woman on the phone was apologetic but firm. "Sir, I understand this must be confusing, but our records show you passed away from a car accident. The paperwork is all in order and properly filed. You'll need to contact the issuing authority if you believe there's been a mistake." A car accident I'd never been in. A death I'd never experienced. A certificate signed by people who knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. According to the government, I'd been dead for 6 months. What really made my blood run cold was when I started digging into what had happened to my grandfather's inheritance. I remembered him mentioning that he'd left money for each of his grandchildren in his will, but I'd assumed that with my no-contact status, they'd just hold my portion in some kind of trust or escrow account. Instead, what I found through online probate records made everything crystal clear. My $75,000 inheritance had been redistributed to my surviving family members after my legal death was confirmed. Evelyn had received an additional $37,000. My parents had split the remainder between them. The probate court filing was dated just 2 weeks after my supposed death. They hadn't waited to see if I might surface or contact them. They hadn't tried to reach me through mutual friends or former employers. They'd moved immediately to claim my inheritance as soon as my death certificate was processed. This wasn't an administrative error or a well-meaning family trying to handle a tragic situation. This was premeditated fraud with a clear financial motive executed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. They declared me dead to steal my inheritance. Once I understood that my family had committed deliberate fraud rather than made some tragic mistake, I needed to understand exactly how they'd pulled it off. The probate court records were publicly available online, and what I found there was like reading a step-by-step manual for inheritance theft. The timeline was surgical in its precision. Death certificate filed on March 15th. Probate petition submitted on March 18th. Notice to creditors and heirs published in a local newspaper for the required 30 days. A newspaper I'd never heard of in a county where I'd never lived. Final distribution order signed by the judge on May 2nd. They'd followed every legal requirement perfectly, except for the minor detail that the person whose estate they were probating was still alive and had never been contacted about any of this. The court had redistributed my inheritance based on their sworn affidavits that I was deceased and that they'd made reasonable efforts to locate any other heirs. The filing showed Evelyn receiving $37,500 as my surviving sibling, while my parents split the remaining $37,500 between them as my next of kin. Clean legal and completely fraudulent. The court records showed exactly how they'd stolen my money. But what really caught my attention was the notary signature on my death certificate. Tom Hendricks wasn't just any business associate of my father's. He was his longtime partner in several real estate ventures and had been the family's go-to guy for handling paperwork that needed official stamps and signatures. I remembered Tom from family gatherings years ago. He was the type of guy who always had stories about legal loopholes and creative business solutions. He'd brag about helping clients optimize their tax situations and navigate complex regulatory environments. In other words, he specialized in making questionable activities look legitimate on paper. The fact that Tom had signed my death certificate meant this wasn't just family fraud. It was an organized conspiracy involving multiple people who all knew exactly what they were doing. Tom had either been paid to forge official documents or was actively participating in the scheme for his own financial benefit. Either way, I now had evidence of a fraud network that extended beyond just my immediate family. Dad's business partner had signed my death certificate. At this point, I realized I was in way over my head and needed professional help to understand my legal options. I'd discovered what appeared to be multiple federal crimes, but I had no idea how to proceed or what kind of evidence would be needed to prove what had happened. I made an appointment with Chris Lopez, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar fraud cases. When I explained my situation, that I'd been declared dead by my family to steal my inheritance, his first reaction was to stare at me for about 30 seconds before asking me to repeat everything I'd just said. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your family filed a death certificate claiming you died in a car accident, used that certificate to claim your inheritance through probate court, and you're sitting here in my office very much alive with documentation of the entire fraud. That's exactly right. And the notary on the death certificate is your father's business partner, Tom Hendricks. I can give you his contact information." Chris shook his head slowly. "Mr. Reed, in 20 years of practicing criminal law, this is the most brazen fraud case I've ever encountered. What your family has done isn't just theft. It's conspiracy to commit federal fraud, identity theft, probate fraud, and potentially a dozen other charges." He walked me through the potential charges and penalties. The death certificate forgery alone was a felony. The probate fraud was another felony. Using my social security number to claim benefits after declaring me dead was federal fraud. Each count could result in years of prison time. The lawyer said this was the most brazen fraud he'd ever seen. As I dug deeper into what my family had done while I was supposedly dead, I discovered they hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They'd created an entire public performance around my death. And like any good performance, they'd documented it thoroughly on social media. I found the evidence on Evelyn's Facebook page, an album titled "Remembering Daniel," with over 40 photos from my memorial service. There I was immortalized in a collage of childhood photos, displayed next to a podium where my tearful family members delivered touching eulogies about their beloved son and brother. The comments section was a masterpiece of fake grief. "He was taken too soon," my mother had written. "Daniel was such a bright light in our lives," my father had posted. Evelyn had shared a long, heartfelt tribute about how much her big brother had meant to her and how his memory would live on forever. But the real kicker was that they'd live-streamed the entire service and posted it on YouTube. 2 hours of my family accepting condolences, sharing memories, and crying crocodile tears, all while knowing exactly where I was and that I was perfectly fine. They'd posted my memorial service on social media. The memorial service was just the beginning of their public fraud performance. What I discovered next made my stolen inheritance look like pocket change compared to the scope of their criminal enterprise. They'd created a nonprofit organization called the Daniel Reed Memorial Scholarship Fund, supposedly to help young people pursue higher education in my memory. The charity's website had my photo, a touching biography that made me sound like a saint, and a donation button for people who wanted to honor my legacy. I pulled their tax returns from the IRS database, and the numbers were staggering. In the 18 months since my death, the scholarship fund had collected over $200,000 in donations. The returns showed that exactly $0 had been distributed to any students, while 90% of the donations had been paid out as administrative expenses to my family members, who served as the charity's board of directors. They were paying themselves salaries from donations that people had given to honor my memory. My mother was listed as the executive director at $60,000 annually. My father was the treasurer at $50,000. Even Evelyn was getting paid as the scholarship selection coordinator, despite the fact that no scholarships had ever been awarded. They'd created a fake charity in my name. But wait, it gets worse. When I contacted the Social Security Administration to understand the full scope of what had been done in my name, I discovered that my death hadn't just been used to steal my inheritance and create a fraudulent charity. My parents had also filed for Social Security survivor benefits as my surviving family members. The monthly payments weren't huge, about $1,200 total, but they'd been collecting them faithfully for 18 months. That was over $21,000 in federal benefits claimed for the death of a person who was still alive and had never been contacted by anyone in the government about his supposed demise. They'd also used my death certificate to claim life insurance benefits from a policy I didn't even know existed. Apparently, my father had taken out a $50,000 term life insurance policy on me years ago and had been faithfully paying the premiums. When I died, he filed a claim and collected the full payout. They'd filed for death benefits in my name, too. Once I understood the full scope of my family's criminal enterprise, I became absolutely methodical about documenting everything they'd done. I'm talking spreadsheets, timelines, cross-reference documentation, and multiple backup copies of every piece of evidence. I started with the death certificate, the foundation of their entire fraud scheme. Not only did I have the original document with Tom Hendrick's forged signature, but I also had the Social Security Administration's records showing when and how it was filed. I had the probate court records showing the exact timeline of how they'd used my death to steal my inheritance. Then came the memorial service evidence. Screenshots of every Facebook post, downloaded copies of the YouTube live stream, saved versions of all the comments where they performed their grief for public consumption. I even found the guest book from the service where dozens of people had signed their names and written condolences to my surviving family members. The scholarship fund documentation was even more damning. Tax returns showing $200,000 in donations with 0 scholarships awarded, bank records showing the money flowing directly into my family's personal accounts, website screenshots advertising the fund, email communications between my parents about how much money they could legally pay themselves as board members. I had proof of every crime they'd committed. My second meeting with Chris Lopez was very different from the first. This time, I walked into his office with 3 banker's boxes full of documentation and a flash drive containing digital evidence of 18 months of systematic federal fraud. Chris spent 2 hours reviewing everything before giving me his assessment. Daniel, what you've compiled here isn't just evidence of a crime. It's a federal prosecutor's dream case. The paper trail is so comprehensive that your family has essentially documented their own crimes for us. He explained that with this level of evidence, federal prosecutors would have multiple options for charges: mail fraud, ER fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, probate fraud, charity fraud, and Social Security fraud. Each charge carried potential prison sentences of 5 to 10 years. The beauty of this case, Chris said, is that your family created all the evidence themselves. Every Facebook post, every tax return, every probate filing. They've handed prosecutors everything they need to prove intent, conspiracy, and systematic fraud. But Chris also offered me something beyond just criminal prosecution: the opportunity for public justice. If you want to maximize the impact of exposing their crimes, we could coordinate with prosecutors to time everything around a public confrontation where your family would be forced to face the evidence in front of witnesses. The prosecutor said this was a slam-dunk federal case. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that prison time wasn't enough. My family had spent 18 months performing their grief publicly, accepting condolences, and playing the victims of a tragic loss. They'd built their fraud on a foundation of public sympathy and fake mourning. If they were going to be exposed, it should be just as public as their performance had been. I wanted everyone who'd attended my memorial service donated to the scholarship fund or believed their lies to see exactly who they really were when the mask came off. Chris helped me plan the perfect venue, their annual 4th of July family reunion. Every year, my parents hosted a big barbecue in their backyard, inviting extended family neighbors and business associates. It would be the perfect audience for the dead man's return. We coordinated with federal prosecutors to have everything ready to execute immediately after the confrontation. Arrest warrants prepared, asset seizure orders signed, media statements drafted. The moment I revealed myself and presented the evidence, the legal machinery would start moving. I wanted everyone to see exactly who they really were. The final step was organizing all the evidence into a presentation that would be impossible to deny or explain away. I created a timeline showing every crime, every lie, every dollar they'd stolen. I had documentation ready to hand to every person at that barbecue: death certificates, probate records, tax returns, bank statements. But the piece de resistance was a video compilation I'd created using their own social media posts. 18 months of them grieving publicly, while spending my money, accepting condolences, while committing federal crimes, playing victims, while being predators. I was going to use their own evidence against them in front of everyone they'd lied to for the past year and a half. Everything was ready for their holiday surprise. The coordination between my public confrontation and the federal prosecution had to be choreographed perfectly. Chris Lopez worked directly with prosecutor Monica Chen to ensure that the moment I revealed myself and presented the evidence, law enforcement would be ready to execute arrest warrants and asset seizure orders. The timing was crucial because my family would undoubtedly try to destroy evidence transfer assets or flee once they realized the scope of what I'd discovered. We needed to move fast enough that they wouldn't have time to cover their tracks or disappear with the money they'd stolen. Monica explained that they'd have FBI agents stationed nearby during the 4th of July barbecue ready to move in immediately after I finished my presentation. The arrest warrants were already signed, and they had court orders to freeze all of my family's bank accounts and seize any assets that could be traced to the fraudulent schemes. The beauty of your plan, Monica told me, is that by confronting them publicly, you're ensuring that we have multiple witnesses to their reactions. If they try to deny the charges or claim ignorance later, we'll have a backyard full of people who heard exactly what they said when presented with the evidence. The timing had to be perfect for maximum devastation. Of course, I had to prepare for the possibility that my family would try their usual manipulation tactics when cornered. After years of gaslighting and emotional manipulation, I knew they'd attempt to turn the situation around and make me look like the villain who was destroying the family over money. I prepared responses for every lie they might try. If they claimed the death certificate was a mistake, I had Tom Hendrick's business relationship with my father documented. If they said the inheritance redistribution was legal, I had proof that they'd never attempted to contact me. If they tried to justify the scholarship fund, I had tax returns showing 0 scholarships awarded. I also made sure that Chris Lopez and prosecutor Monica would be available by phone during the confrontation. If my family tried to claim that my evidence was fabricated or that I was lying about the federal investigation, I could put the prosecutor on speakerphone to confirm that criminal charges were being filed. But most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for the possibility that this confrontation would end my relationship with my family permanently. There would be no going back from accusing them of federal crimes in front of their friends and neighbors. This wasn't about setting boundaries or having difficult conversations. This was about destroying them completely. I'd prepared for every lie they might try. The morning of July 4th, I drove to my parents' house with a leather briefcase containing copies of every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Death certificates, probate records, tax returns, bank statements, social security documents, and a tablet loaded with their social media posts, and the memorial service video. I also had business cards from Chris Lopez and prosecutor Monica Chen to hand out to anyone who wanted independent confirmation that this wasn't some elaborate family feud, but an actual federal criminal case with real prosecutors and pending charges. As I pulled into their driveway, I could hear the sounds of the barbecue already in full swing. Music, laughter, conversations. The perfect backdrop for a family celebration that was about to become a public criminal prosecution. My family had no idea that their annual tradition was about to become the stage for their complete destruction. I was about to crash my own memorial celebration. Walking into my parents' backyard felt like stepping into a scene from my own memorial service, except this time I was the surprise guest instead of the guest of honor. The 4th of July barbecue was in full swing, with about 30 people scattered across the lawn, drinking beer, eating burgers, and celebrating America's independence. My mother Lucy was holding court near the grill, telling a story to a group of neighbors. My father Raymond was by the pool, probably boring someone with his latest business success. Evelyn was sitting at a picnic table with some cousins, looking perfectly relaxed and happy. They were all enjoying their stolen money in the sunshine, playing the role of a normal, loving family who'd tragically lost a son and brother. But the performance was about to end. I walked through the back gate and started across the lawn, briefcase in hand. The first person to notice me was my Uncle Steve, who did a double take and nearly dropped his beer. Then my cousin Janet saw me, and her mouth fell open. Within about 10 seconds, a ripple of shocked silence was spreading across the entire party. By the time I reached the center of the lawn, everyone was staring at me like I'd literally risen from the dead. "You all look like you've seen a ghost," My mother was the first to find her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual words. "Daniel, what? How are you? We thought you were dead," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yeah, I know. I've seen the death certificate. Very official-looking document. Tom Hendricks did a nice job with the notary stamp." The color drained from my father's face when I mentioned Tom's name. Evelyn looked like she was about to be sick. But my mother, true to form, immediately shifted into damage control mode. "There must be some kind of mistake," she said, forcing a smile for the audience of neighbors and family members. "We haven't seen you in so long we didn't know where you were. When we couldn't find you, we were told that you'd been in an accident." It was a masterful performance, the concerned mother confused by a bureaucratic error, just grateful to see her missing son alive and well. Time to destroy that performance with facts. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first stack of documents. "No mistake, Mom. Here's the death certificate you filed claiming I died in a car accident on March 15th. Here's the probate court filing, where you redistributed my $75,000 inheritance among yourselves just 3 days later. And here's the Social Security paperwork, where you claimed survivor benefits in my name." I held up each document as I spoke, making sure everyone at the barbecue could see the official seals and signatures. "Oh, and here are the tax returns for the Daniel Reed Memorial Scholarship Fund, the charity you created in my memory that's collected over $200,000 in donations while awarding exactly 0 scholarships." The silence was deafening. 30 people stood frozen, trying to process what they were hearing. My family's friends and neighbors were staring at documents that proved the people they'd been consoling for 18 months were actually criminals who'd faked their son's death for money. "Here's every crime you committed in my name." My father finally found his voice, but instead of shame or remorse, he went straight to anger and threats. "You ungrateful little bastard," he snarled. "After everything we've done for you, you come here and try to destroy your own family with lies and accusations." Evelyn jumped in with her practiced victim routine. "Daniel, we were grieving. We thought you were dead. If there were mistakes made, they were honest mistakes by people who were heartbroken and trying to cope with losing you." But my mother went for the nuclear option, full gaslighting in front of 30 witnesses. "You've always been jealous of what this family has built," she said, her voice rising. "You couldn't stand that we were successful and happy, so now you're making up stories and forging documents to try to get money that was never yours in the first place." It was a beautiful display of their true character for everyone to see. No apologies, no shame, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just anger threats and lies when confronted with proof of their crimes. You have a choice: face the truth or face the prosecutor. That's when I pulled out my phone and dialed Prosecutor Monica Chen's direct number. When she answered, I put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. "Monica, this is Daniel Reed. I'm at the family gathering we discussed, and I've just presented the evidence to everyone here. My family is claiming the documents are forgeries, and that I'm lying about the federal investigation." Monica's voice came through crystal clear for all 30 witnesses to hear. "Mr. Reed, I can confirm that the U.S. Attorney's Office has been investigating this case for the past 6 weeks. We have arrest warrants prepared for Lucy Reed, Raymond Reed, and Evelyn Reed on charges of conspiracy, fraud, identity theft, and multiple federal crimes. FBI agents are standing by to execute those warrants. Could you please confirm for everyone here that this is a real federal case with real prosecutors and real charges?" "Absolutely. This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases my office has seen. The evidence Mr. Reed has compiled documents systematic criminal activity over 18 months with financial damages exceeding $400,000. As Monica was speaking, I could see FBI agents walking through the back gate. The barbecue guests started backing away as 3 agents in bulletproof vests approached my parents and sister. The handcuffs looked perfect on their wrists. The federal case moved faster than even prosecutor Monica Chen had expected. With overwhelming evidence and multiple witnesses to their crimes, my family's lawyers immediately started negotiating plea deals rather than going to trial and facing even harsher sentences. My mother, Lucy, received 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud. My father, Raymond, got 2 years for masterminding the scheme and involving Tom Hendricks in the document forgery. Evelyn, despite her law degree, got 15 months for participating in the probate fraud and helping to manage the fake scholarship fund. But the prison sentences were just the beginning of their consequences. All of their assets were seized to pay restitution. The house, the cars, the business investments, everything they'd built their wealthy lifestyle on. The Daniel Reed Memorial Scholarship Fund was dissolved and its remaining funds distributed to actual scholarship recipients. Their social circle completely abandoned them once the story hit the local news. Tom Hendricks lost his notary license and his business license, effectively ending his career in real estate. The ripple effects destroyed their entire network of enablers and accomplices. They learned that money can't buy immunity from fraud charges. As for me, I recovered my $75,000 inheritance plus interest, damages, and legal fees. More importantly, I got something I'd never had from my family: complete freedom from their manipulation and control. I maintained absolute no contact throughout their trials and sentencing. When they tried to reach out from prison asking for forgiveness and claiming they'd learned their lesson, I forwarded their letters to my attorney without reading them. Their opinion of me, their attempts at reconciliation, their promises to do better, none of it mattered anymore. I used the money I recovered to buy a house in a different state, started a new career, and built relationships with people who valued honesty over family loyalty. I discovered what it felt like to live without constantly looking over my shoulder for the next manipulation or guilt trip. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had declared me dead to get rid of the family disappointment and access my money. Instead, they'd given me exactly what I needed to build a life completely free from their toxic influence. Being declared dead by my family was the best thing that ever happened to me.